Do you want to JavaScribe since you're sitting right here? Yeah, cool. And I'm happy to take notes. I don't think we'll have that many decisions to note. So good morning, everybody. Probably particularly good morning to Ken, who's up at 5:30 a.m. over in the US. Welcome to the extra working, no, it's not the extra. We've only got one extra working group. This is it on the Thursday morning. We have here the Notewell updated. I did actually check. There are two copies of BCP 25 in there for different reasons, and they both actually are mentioned in BCP 25. So I think that's actually real. You obviously can't read that slide, but you can easily search this thing on the internet. All right. Well, you're doing well. I've made it very, very small. This is the rough agenda I've put together. Absolutely happy to rearrange, move things around, whatever people need. Does anyone have anything they want to add to the agenda at this point? I've already noted that Barry's proposed new draft is in there. Do you think 5 minutes will do for that? I thought it might. Excellent. Shall we begin? There are only 6 open issues in GitHub. I closed the 2 regarding unique ID because I have now written a draft for unique ID, as I promised. And there's been a bit of backwards and forwards on that. So we have issues on save date, special use, something I created to put an informational document about how the Cyrus replication protocol works because it's designed to replicate the IMAP data model, and it might be a useful thing to have. And there are a couple of issues about the 64-bit or 63-bit extension. I believe all of these should be covered in, apart from the Cyrus replication thing, there's space for each of them under the draft. So we probably should speak about them then. Barry.
I guess do we have a separate item for the 64-bit?
Yes.
Okay, I'll wait till then.
All right, so these are the existing drafts that we have sitting in our queue in various states. There are 6 of them so far, and we have 3 more proposed coming down the wire. I don't have enough experience to know if that is an insanely large number to have in a working group at once or not, but some of these don't have much work left on them.
Yeah, I'll have to wear multiple hats here. So with my ID hat on, I think it would be nice to get 1 or 2 of your queue.
Yep.
Because I suspect that list my right and status size are done. Maybe CF special use as well.
Yep.
This is Barry, and I think the one I'm proposing is basically done on contact. I think we should leave the IMAP rev for after we get a few of these off the queue before we start, and then concentrate on that. Well, anyway.
Now we definitely have a conflict of interest because I think you can probably, speaking as a participant, you probably can work in parallel, but you don't need to be done with it right away.
All right, so I now have slides for each of these. So since Ken's online, are you awake enough to start talking about your ones, Ken? Yeah. Here we go. All right. So there's the first slide, and here's Ken.
Waiting for the slide to come up. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
We can see you too.
Well, hey.
Beautiful. Hopefully my eyes aren't too baggy. Okay, so IMAP list rights. This is very, very similar to an existing RFC, which does the status on extended list. So all this is a new return option for extended list, which will return a my rights response for each of the existing listable mailboxes that come back in the list response itself. The benefit of this, it reduces a round trip for each of the mailboxes that a client would want to get the rights for. Next slide, please. And there's a very simple example of what it would look like. As the only interesting bit here is the last mailbox bar, which is non-existent. You obviously do not get a my rights response for a non-existent mailbox. And that's pretty much it.
Cool.
Any questions?
This is Barry. It strikes me that retrieving your rights could be an expensive operation, relatively speaking. Is there any discussion of that in the draft? I don't recall.
I don't recall off the top of my head either, Barry. I'd have to take a look.
So
I believe
just,
there is a mention of it. I do not recall to what level.
okay, because I just worry that if someone had access to 10,000 mailboxes and you did this command, right, it could be very expensive, and it might be worth calling that out. So.
I was thinking about how I'm going to implement it in our server, and I suspect I will probably do list return my rights and special use at the same time, because that's and this list is very small. So that's probably the mailboxes I care about, and everything else I will do as the user selects them. But I'm not suggesting that this document needs to mention special use, but I think it's probably worth discussing. The only other comment I have is you have the N right shown in example, which I think is annotation extension or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think because it's not part of standard IMAP ACL, it's an extension to it. I think you should point out in a comment saying that, well, in case people will try to actually analyze your example where this is coming from. So
I'll just remove it, Alexei. It's probably simpler that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, this has been implemented in the Cyrus server because this is where it came from. It's used, certainly the reason I asked for it in the first place for Fastmail is that it's used to display whether a mailbox is writable or not through to the UI. And that's very useful to get for all the mailboxes at once. So we run, my rights is very cheap in our server, and we just run a select all mailboxes with my rights so that we can keep the display up in sync.
yeah, I think in our implementation, we in a web mail server part of our implementation, we open drafts and send folder as soon as the user logs in internally. So you want the rights on these, that's sort of, again, so to know whether, well, do you have this folder and, what kind of rights you have.
Oh. All right, so I guess next steps here are for Ken to take those two suggestions, probably produce one more draft, and then probably take it to working group last call after that. I would think I can't see anything else that's likely to be an issue here.
Back to Barry's comment, there is a one or two sentence paragraph that does say that if the server is unable to look up the set of rights, that the server may drop the my rights reply. I don't know if that's sufficient or if you want me to expand on that.
No, I was looking at advice to clients to be careful about how they use it.
Okay, fair enough.
Did you want to, while we have a room poll for people interested in implementing it, just to verify the spec has?
Sure, that seems reasonable. That was Chris Newman, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
I'm taking notes. Sure. Who's interested in implementing this?
So few people in the room, I don't know that holding the room is going to be too valuable, but who's going to put it in a client? That's the big question.
Well, us, obviously.
Okay. So we've got a couple. All right.
Yep.
Yes, I'm usually less worried about servers because, we got a bunch of them and they all seem to want to implement everything, so.
All right. Anything else on this, or shall we move on to the next one? Cool. All right. Thank you. Civ Extra FCC, while we've got you here, Ken.
Okay, this draft essentially is a way to store a copy of any outgoing messages that get generated by SID actions. Obviously, the name FCC came from a non-standard header that some email clients use. Right now, the draft stipulates that it's only compatible with vacation and notify. It is specifically not compatible with reject, any reject. That was basically because it violates the SMT principle of either a message is delivered or bounced. This would break that, obviously, by storing a copy. Next slide, please. Is the next slide coming up?
There you go. Has here.
So there's a very simple example. Basically, the tagged argument takes a mailbox name. So in this case, it's added to the vacation extension. Next slide. I did make this work with the existing file to options that make sense. So those additional options would get placed in between the FCC tag and the mailbox name. So in this case, you could use special use, create, and add flags. I don't know if that is too complex for this draft, but it is implemented in Cyrus. So it's certainly doable.
That was Barry calling looks good if it didn't come through on the microphone.
Okay, thanks, Barry.
Alexei, I do have possible concerns in a sense of I need to double check whether Civ base spec allows. Basically, you're sort of trying to say that you have the way grammar is structured, that you have options to existing tagged parameters, and then you're reusing other tagged parameters names with the same syntax here. And question number one, can they be repeated with and without FCC in the same statement? I don't know the answer to this. Maybe it's a stupid question. And if they can, whether this is actually allowed according to the Civ spec. So it's not a showstopper, but I have a concern, and I think I have a work item to double check whether this is okay or not. And I would like to hear other people what they think about this.
This is Barry. I'm not sure what you're getting at. In this case, I mean, these are parameters to the FCC action. So I don't see that. You're not using special use as an action. You're using it as a parameter. Well, there's no nesting of parameters done here. There's the special use parameters, the create parameters, the flags parameter. I don't,
Yeah, FCC is a parameter to vacation,
yeah.
and then it has sub-parameters up until it's...
Yeah, there's definitely a level of nesting.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, okay. Well, Alexei's going to check, so I'll shut up.
All right. Apart from that, are there any other issues we should be? So again, I think this is probably resolve this issue and then take it to working group last call.
The other question, I'm sorry, I haven't read the mailing list. There was a discussion about reject, whether it's actually okay to, and I think Ned commented on this. I don't know what the resolution was.
Ned was happy with the resolution that we say it can't be used for reject, and nobody else wants it enough to argue against that. If there's a demand for it again in the future, then we could do yet another extension to allow it for reject.
Right. I think I read a intermediate message in the thread saying that actually maybe we should be allowed because this is internal to the server anyway. So I didn't read the conclusion. That's fine.
Nobody really needs it for that. The thing that we definitely want it for at Fastmail is if we send out a vacation response, we want to have a copy of that. If we send out a notification response, we want to have a copy of it so that we have that history of everything that's been done on the user's behalf. Reject we do at the boundary anyway. So, and I think a lot of sites will be similar.
And this is Barry. I agree that we should not allow it and that anybody who wants to have it will implement it anyway and ignore that. So I don't care.
Actually, I remembered another issue. The way how Notify framework was written was very carefully, we were separating method for notifications from the general framework. So notification methods is keyed off the URI that you're using. So you can use notifications to generate XMPP instant messaging notifications, or you can use mail to generate emails. The way the document says is, it doesn't talk about this, it just assumes that you can always archive. Now, it might be a wording issue or clarifying that it only applies to when you use mail to notifications. If you want to archive XMPP notifications, then you have to say much more and say, what exactly does it mean? Yeah.
So Alexi, you're uncomfortable with the hand waving I did, saying that it's up to the server to determine how to save a copy depending on the notified action?
Yes, there was a deliberate decision discussing a Notify framework that there are different sort of plugins for different types of notifications over different protocols, and they all describe requirements for how messages are generated, how they look like and stuff. And you're glossing over it, or either you are omitting details or you are violating this separation. So I think you probably need more text, either way.
Okay, if you've got something in mind, please open an issue for it.
So either option one, you just say, this only applies to email notification framework, and you add a reference to second RFC, which describe the email notifications. If you want to use it for other type of notifications, you say you can use it for other type notifications, but then you need to add details about what does it mean.
Okay.
Cool.
So
I could see text that said something like, if the server supports file into FCC for this type of notification, then it accepts the civ script, otherwise it rejects it as incompatible with FCC. And if the server does have a way to take a copy of it, then presumably that's what the user was asking for.
yes, again, using XMPP as an example, if you want to allow for this, even if you don't specify the exact message generated, because it's going to be effectively XMPP message converted to email, at least say so. This is still better than just, there is nothing there.
Yeah. Okay, so need some more words for that. All right, so maybe this one we should finish that and then come back for one more check that everyone's happy before we. Yeah. Cool. All right, moving on. The next one is 64-bit, Alexi. Welcome back. Thanks, Ken.
Right. So this started as a very simple draft that, why don't we make, message sizes 63 bits and just update the grammar everywhere. And then Chris sent his email with lots of operational issues, which I think are valid. I entirely admit, I just haven't thought about this. So I'll invite Chris to talk more about his issues.
Okay, this is Chris Newman. So yeah, so one of the issues was this is an implicit format change to the mailbox for implementations that assume 32-bit sizes, and that's a lot of code changes often. In Cyrus-based servers, that's a new mailbox index format which can have migration issues. It's supposed to auto migrate, but there you go. Doesn't mean it's perfect. So I'm curious what's driving I'm probably not interested in implementing it, but I'm curious what's driving this. Is there actual interest in implementing this for some particular class of application or something.
Yeah. The question I saw in your stuff, and I think it was even more important than this because the server can implement it or not, is if the server supports it and a client uses 32-bit storage for fields that are now 64 bits, the client can't really opt out because the server has data in there which it can't represent over 32-bit anymore. So the client will fetch something that has a number that's too large for the space it's storing it.
There's an enable for this.
So what happens to a message that's too big?
Right.
Well, that's the question. So the client has to opt into syntactic extension. So the server will never send 64-bit sizes to old clients. The question is, if a message is more than 4 gigabytes, what should the old client get in this case? And it ain't pretty. Yeah, tombstone, or maybe respond no to the fetch command, or
Respond bad.
That will bad, definitely not bad.
Yeah.
And no will break a lot of clients. It'll just they'll just fuck up everything, so.
well, it can be untagged no, but it's I know it's
Even untagged no, I think isn't really gonna work. I think you need to either eliminate the message, which I don't like, or send a tombstone that indicates it's an empty message or something. At least the user will still scratch its head, but there'll be an indication that there's something funny there. But is there really a use case for this, or are we just saying, why not? This is really complicated.
That is a question for Alexi. Who needs it? Who wants it?
I don't actually have a good answer to this. Well, I didn't think of this. I thought it was a good service to the community to document this, but I personally don't have a use case.
Okay.
So
Then this is Barry. I recommend that we park it, and it can just be an expired draft until somebody says, "Oh, look, we do need this," because it's just too complicated to put out for nobody who wants it.
So I see, the question is, we should probably ask DevCode guys and Cyrus, Fastmail, Camp. Well, you can talk for yourself. I don't know if you have a use case, but we should probably ask DevCode because they commented. I just, I can ask privately or publicly saying, is it just you think it's a good
We have
idea?
Stefan online from Dovecot.
Yeah.
And while he's Pac-manning across, if he wants to Pac-man across, we have no urgent need for it at Fastmail. We would possibly implement it, but we wouldn't be in a hurry to, and we wouldn't need it. Stefan, did you want to comment? You're next anyway, so it's a good time to hop in the line. Now.
Someone from
Mike. Yeah. Dovecot supports 64-bit internally. Sean Leonard says, I don't think 64-bit should be parked. Reason is because if the implementation tail is long, at least by having the option out there.
I'll wait till he's finished. Or maybe it was a ...
It gives developers time to prepare.
Okay, so this is Barry. I don't think developers are going to, because this is sufficiently complex to put in, I don't think developers are going to stick it in just in case, just because we published it. So I don't really think that's going to give us a benefit.
Neil Jenkins, can you just clarify in Dovecot what they support is 64-bit? Is that 64-bit message sizes, 64-bit UIDs, or everything, or what? Is it just message size?
well,
Right.
as in this extension.
Sorry, okay. What do they
Wa-
use
watching-
64-bit messages
Watching for the comments to come through on Jabber.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're talking about that, I would be more willing to support 64-bit UIDs. unfortunately, that requires the same mode switch that this does. So, yeah.
Stefan says, I don't know, Jeff might.
Well, we need to ask on the list.
Haven't heard from Jeff.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, so we'll
I
take this to
don't-
the list.
We don't need answer in the room. I think that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, personally, I'm okay with parking it if there is no immediate use. That's fine.
All right. Next up is status size. Yeah, Jeff says in Dovecot UIDs are 32-bit, but message sizes are 64-bit. Yeah.
I guess Stefan appears not to have audio or speaking.
Here he comes. All right. You're on.
Yes, so what should I say? Does anyone have any questions about this draft?
I think the second bullet is appropriate.
So status size is, I think everyone agrees, is ready to go to working group last call. The one clarifying question that came up was what the size should be, and I believe everyone's agreed it should be the sum of the RFC 822.size of all the messages that exists in the folder, which matches the example in the draft.
I think the draft also says that explicitly. So
Yeah. I read the draft. I think it's ready.
Cool.
Chris Newman, just to be annoying, I wanted to ask, how would this interact with the email address internationalization extension? So why I ask that is, once you implement email address internationalization, you've got two different classes of messages in your mail store. You've got the EAI ones and the traditional ones. And if you downgrade the EAI ones, they have a different size. So
What does your server return when you ask it for RFC 822.size of message?
So right, the way it kind of has to work is if the server does downgrading, it has to depend on whether or not enable the UTF-8 command has been issued by the client. So the server will actually have to store two sets of sizes for the new messages. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful to just have a little implementation note about that. So when people are doing this, they can think, oh, wait, maybe I should have two slots rather than one in my data format.
I agree on this. I agree on the note. The other thing that occurred to me, sort of related to this, is we do have metadata that we store with mailboxes. If this value is used to calculate quota or inform users about quota, we can possibly say that the server may return value which is bigger than the sum of message sizes. Yeah. That includes the other information. In this case, if you support UTF-8, then you might just count both of them as, it's metadata. But happy to discuss.
Yes, this is Barry. That's what I was going to go somewhere related to that. That why do we need this? And so do we need it to be exact? And if it can be a little larger, maybe, so it's an estimate. It cannot be smaller, but if we can say that it must be at least as big. Right now, I was just looking at the text. Right now, it says, crap, it scrolled funny. This must be equal to the sum of the values of the RFC 822.size fetch message data item of all the messages in the mailbox. And I suggest we say this must be equal to or greater than, and then explain why it might be different. And then I would be happier.
Stefan?
I must say I'm not too well versed in the internationalization part of IMAP at the moment. We still haven't implemented that. But I see what you're getting at. I think the original reason this exists is webmail clients. So those have more trouble if they want to establish how big the mailbox is. So if that sum is a little larger than the actual value, I think it's no problem.
Okay, one other issue, which I don't think we need to worry about, but I just want to make sure people are aware that this issue is out there, is that, sometimes people, when there's a quota on usage, that quota isn't restricted to just mail. It covers other sorts of objects which may not be stored on the mail store. And so there's actually an integration problem with our current specs where there isn't a clear way to have sort of an Uber quota that's integratable with other services.
I'd be tempted to say that's out of scope. For this spec, what we're interested in is a way to avoid having to count the sizes of all the messages to know which folders are big. Generally.
Right. I agree with that, but just wanted to point out the issue.
Yeah, thank you.
This reminded me though, the Quota spec is really old spec. I think it doesn't even use the latest ABNF syntax. It's so old.
Yes.
So as a question, maybe this working group wants to revise this. If the revise Quota. And I'm sort of half volunteering. Dave Cridland and I had a proposal like 6-8 years ago, which expired, which was trying to talk more about different quota routes and quota usages and other things. So there is something to build on if you want to do this.
Interesting. I'd say probably let's clear a little bit of the decks first before we add another thing in. But yes.
Could also be part of Ref 2, right?
Sorry, what was that?
It could also be part of IMAP 4 Ref 2, right?
Let's talk about this later.
Yeah.
We have a couple of additional quota types in the Cyrus server. We have a quota number of folders. So because that's one resource that doesn't count towards your quota, so you can't create an infinite number of folders. You can set a maximum and you can fetch X num folders extension. We have a quota for annotation usage separately to mail usage, so that the number of per message annotations and per mailbox annotations gets counted as well. Again, so that you can't store infinite data in something that's not being counted. You need limits for everything that a user can do, or there's an abuse vector.
So for this document, I suggest there is, 1 or 2 sentences as per comment from Chris and the discussion that followed. But I'm almost tempted for you to start working group last call now, and we just take it as a one working group last call comment.
Okay.
Barry's happy with this. So that we can get this one quickly. I think it's really, in a good state.
Excellent. Everybody is happy.
Chris is happy with this
We'll
too.
go to working group last call with a comment saying greater than. Hey!
So hint, chairs can send the working group last call message today.
Yes, hopefully. Today's a very busy day. All right. Next up, while we've got you here, Stefan, save date.
Yes. Well, there's one open issue there that we discussed on the mailing list, and that's what to do if we have a mailbox that doesn't actually support the save date metadata as to actually store it. So, and if you have search queries that involve that particular save date, what to do. And also, if you have the multi-mailbox search extension, you can span multiple mailboxes with your search. And if one of those, or a few of those, don't support save date, what do we do with the query?
Right, Alexei here. I don't think client will cope very well if you fail search command with an extension and there is no signal coming on mailbox open that you don't support this, so the client cannot actually know without trying. So I suggest either make the failure silent or add a way for the select to come back with the, I don't know, no save date or something. Tag the response code or something like that.
Yeah, that's what Bron also proposed, I guess, in the beginning.
And then with multi-mailbox search, if you just do it silent or, there is a way of returning response code saying, well, some mailboxes didn't support this, but I carried on anyway. So
I'm not, speaking for myself, I'm not too worried about the multi-mailbox search case. I think that's unlikely to be the kind of place where you would need this. Yes.
Chris Newman, we actually implement multi-mailbox search, and so my preference would be if, now we don't have any mailboxes that don't support save date. I mean, we've got a proprietary or a private extension for save date, so it's good. It's being standardized, so I'm all good with this. But if the way I would want to handle it is if a mailbox didn't support save date, I treat that query term as equivalent to internal date.
Yes.
So that's, and whether or not you get signaling of whether about a mailbox supporting save date, I don't really care. I don't see anything useful a client can do with that signaling. So I don't care if you signal or not.
Okay. I'd like to tell you the use case where I'm worried about this, which is that you do an auto purge after 1 month on a mailbox as a save date query. And if you do that against a mailbox that doesn't support save date, then messages that were moved in there but were old will disappear immediately, which is not the intended behavior.
I actually heard from the main programmer of Dovecot that in some cases we actually use the current date at the moment where it becomes relevant, and then it's saved to cache. So that's a separate store. And not sure how applicable that is to other systems.
So the client figures it out when it first sees the message, it caches that?
Yeah. No, actually, the server caches it at that moment. The backend storage doesn't support it, but the cache will. And then it will be in the index.
Yeah. So this is Barry. My view of the end user using something like this would be exactly with a multi-mailbox search, where show me the messages that got stuffed somewhere yesterday.
Yeah.
So multi-mailbox would be an issue, but I agree with Chris on how to deal with that. Which means that you'll break that case, but you won't find all the messages, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I think the client needs to know whether it was broken for any of the mailboxes. I think that's what we're arguing, because the client might potentially do something else or decide, if this is purge messages from the last month, maybe I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, okay. So at the select
Purge messages younger is fine. Sorry, Stefan. Did you want to finish?
Well, we had an initial proposal to return an additional response in the select reply, right? So that would indicate it's not supported or it is supported. I'm not sure which one is better, but
I'm really happy with the amount that LibreOffice is crashing on me right here.
Well, I suppose just for completeness, you could have a search term save date supported, which would allow you to construct searches for any case.
That is better than the things I came up with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm suggesting this. I'm not convinced it's a good idea because the problem I have with it is clients tend to not do this sort of thing right. I mean, I don't consider it really a hack. It allows you to construct searches that do what you want based on the presence of the extension.
Okay, can you elaborate?
Is it just a Boolean flag?
So it's a Boolean flag. So if you want to construct a search where it's it uses save date or internal date, then you mix this flag in with Boolean logic and have the search covering both. Or if you want to do a search that's for purging, then you mix this flag in and with current date. Okay, I'll send that to the mailing list so we can consider it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like Chris's idea. This is Barry. Because it solves the problem of the purge thing. You can eliminate the mailboxes that don't support it from your purge. It doesn't solve the problem of the use case that I had, where I want to see what I added to my mail store in the last 2 days. And I'm still not going to be able to know about that from them if there are some mailboxes that don't support this feature. But that's okay. So.
All right, so I think the conclusion here is let's take this to the mailing list. There's a fair bit of discussion still to have.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the use case. So from, again, I'm making some assumptions here, but I suspect that you're probably going to support it for all your personal mailboxes or none of them, or for example, all shared mailboxes or none of them type thing. So you're unlikely to not support it for trash, where it's probably the most useful, right? So, but probably we should have a text about this, saying that if you choose to implement this, consider this carefully.
Yeah, it's Barry. I kind of wonder, we're speculating on this. Do we really expect servers to support it for some mailboxes and not others in the general case? I mean, okay, right, different namespaces, but that's different from different mailboxes in the same namespace. And my view is that I don't think any server is really going to support it for some mailboxes in a given namespace and not others. So I think really we're thrashing about on something that's not going to be a problem in practice.
Yeah, so the main issue is how it behaves in the case where it's not supported, and we do need to have both a well-defined answer to that and a way to detect it.
Yeah.
Cool. So this will go to the mailing list and for further discussion. Next up is Civ special use.
Okay. Is the registry actually a ticket for this draft?
Yeah, so there were 2 tickets. One of them is we need to create a registry of special use with IANA. I don't know if someone has already taken that or what the plan was for that.
That's in my draft. So
Yeah.
I think we should just leave it there.
Yep.
And
Okay.
we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay. And the other ticket is basically just you needing to do stuff. So
Yeah, so just defining the IMAP commands. Excellent. So does this mean we wait behind Barry's draft for working group last call, or can we send them through together?
We can send them through together. We can send this through ahead of time, just have an RFC editor note if necessary to say that it has to wait for the registry creation. But I don't think it's going to be an issue because I can't see that my document is going to take any significant time to finish.
no. And I will need some time to fix those IMAP command examples.
Cool. All right, so we wait for another draft, and then I believe it's ready to go to working group last call once that wording's put in there.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. And that's all our current drafts. Thank you. Next, we have the proposed additional work. And we're pretty much on time, according to the agenda. So let's start with special use important.
Okay, and the first bullet is me. And the second bullet is what it does. The background is that, as I said, in Singapore, the guy from Google and I wrote this up a long time ago, and it just sort of, it got discussed a little bit and then sat. And so I brought it back up for this working group. I've made one rev of changes, so there's a 0.1 out there now. And that covers all the comments that have been made, except for the elimination of a spurious word in there that is queued up for the 00 working group version, should this working group adopt it. So I ask the chairs to call for objections to taking this on. And then as soon as I post the 00 working group version, I will ask the chairs to working group last call it, because I think we're ready with it.
Yep. Absolutely. Are there any objections to?
Neil Jenkins, just the registry that we're creating, we're going to want to reuse with JMAP here, and it might be useful for the registry actually to note when, if there's something that, if registrations apply to both, or if I don't know, we need to just check anyway if there's something we will need to say in the registry that's specific about JMAP or IMAP. I'm thinking of things like,
In JMAP, you just say you're using this registry, so it's not a problem. I mean, unless, I don't think there is any special information that you need in the registry, do you?
But he's saying some things might or might not apply.
so, well, for example, in terms of the differences,
Hang on a sec.
in JMAP, there's an inbox special use because it's not a fixed name. You can have a localized name, unlike IMAP, so there's no current. So if you added that to the special use registry, would that also apply to IMAP, or would that be JMAP only?
Okay. So I will add a column to the registry for use restrictions or something like that.
Yeah, thanks.
Chris Newman, the other option is to put that in the JMAP spec, in the IANA consideration of the JMAP spec, where you say, where you add you modify the registry to allow use restrictions.
That's a little icky because in the JMAP spec, you register the inbox special use, and there's nothing in IMAP that says that doesn't apply here. So I would rather have something in the registry that says that this applies to all users of the registry unless specified here, and then in the JMAP case, you can say JMAP only.
Yes, I'm okay with that. I was about to add to the bike shed by saying put it out in a separate document, but it's probably not necessary. So
Excellent. So everyone's happy, right?
Yes.
We have had no objections. Barry's going to upload a new draft, which is going to go straight to working group last call, and we'll have a registry by next week. Good work, team. All right, next is me. The unique ID draft, which I wrote a few days ago.
Just a procedural thing for
Yep.
just to make sure everybody understands with the registry, that the registry actually gets created when the IESG approves the document, not when it's published as an RFC. So you actually get the registry on the soon side of things.
Excellent. Unique ID. I wrote the first draft using names that were derived from the XGM Google names, and everyone said, "Bron, you idiot, why don't you make them match JMAP names?" So I did that. I've published a draft 01, which has the matches of IMAP names of JMAP names instead. There was debate over whether the syntax for the status response should put brackets around the value, since it is not an integer. It's not a simple value. Alexi, it's your draft that we're messing with here.
for somebody who didn't get a chance to actually read your draft, can you do you have an example?
Yes, I do.
Because I think, no, I need to double check. Status might have a atom as a possible value. So if you have 64-bit thing there, it's still an atom. But
Yeah.
so I would prefer you reuse the syntax, yes.
Cool. All right. So this is draft unique ID. So
So I wanted to ask Alexi a direct question about 4466. So there is a restriction in 4466. I raised this issue. There is a restriction in 4466 that says the arguments to status items are either a number or a parenthesized list in the syntax. And I wanted to know why that was done, and why you didn't just allow a string as well.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
So I think we probably didn't have example of a string at the time. Okay, I think I probably have an action item, I think, in this case.
Yeah. I'm quite happy to make it a parenthesized list with an A string in it. That's absolutely fine. It's the real question, I think, for me, is whether there exist client implementations which would be confused by having a bare A string rather than an A string in a list. Because I know certainly with our Perl client libraries, we would just wind up with an extra level of indirection to get to the item.
That was sort of the reason why there was a restriction on a regular syntax, so that clients are more likely to generate these things, but if the different components is trying to parse it, then it should be able to skip the stuff it doesn't understand. That's why you want to put it in a parents. But let me come back to you on this, on whether I think it's okay syntactically.
So that's one question about the IDs. The other question about the IDs, which we do not have, sorry, stupid crash to try and bring the slides back up here. There we go. Zoom through to you again. I haven't put it up on the slide for this, but the other big question is the format of IDs. Do we allow 1 to 255 characters of, seriously? It crashed again. Of random crap, or do we limit it to a subset of characters? Neil and I are discussing this over breakfast this morning, said that URL safe base 64 character set seems like a sane set of characters. That's A to Z in capital and lowercase, 0 to 9, dash, hyphen, and underscore. That gives you 64 code points that you can encode your ID in, allowing more efficient representation than pure hex, but it's still safe for all the contexts, JSON or URLs in which you're likely to see one of these things. So if your client doesn't understand about escaping things properly, it will still not break anything. This is based on feedback from Arndt from the list. We're planning to do exactly the same thing with IDs in JMap as well.
Alexi, seems very sane.
Excellent. I will update the text to limit it to that. So work items from here are for Alexi to look into the syntax for the status response, for me to look into the documenting the IDs. So there are three things that this gives you. It gives you a mailbox ID as a status response, which is supposed to, but not absolutely required, to remain the same when you rename a mailbox. So in every case, there is a potential implementation which you can do without requiring any additional data storage. You wind up with a less efficient behavior, but a rename doesn't guarantee you the same mailbox ID at the far end of a rename if the server has no way of storing an ID.
Neil Jenkins, just curious why, because wouldn't, in that case, you just not implement this extension if you can't actually provide any useful data?
Again, it's where you have different things supported by your server. Some mailboxes support all of this, some don't. Or
so it's where you could do unique IDs on the messages, but not the mailboxes.
Yeah, for example,
okay.
Or any of those cases. You can still generate a thing, but it's not.
Well, so it strikes me, I think this particular extension, client authors are actually probably going to adopt pretty quickly or will like a lot because it's really useful. And knowing what they can rely on is kind of helpful. I don't know. I guess as long as they're getting something useful, but it would be pointless if you say you implement it and then don't actually give any useful information from it.
Yeah. I mean, you still give them an ID that they can use as a cache key.
Again, sorry, I haven't read the draft yet, but maybe you want to split the capabilities into mailbox IDs and message IDs. I don't know.
The downside of that is that
I
capabilities gets
understand.
ridiculously
I
long.
understand. I'm just saying
Yep.
this is one possible. If you're likely to implement one and not the other, that might be a way around it. But I don't know.
It'll be fairly rare. It will either be all or nothing. One thing in particular that I was careful not to mandate was threading, because that's calculating thread IDs is much more complex than just storing a unique ID for everything.
Thank you.
There has been some debate over whether it should be nil or whether it should be a string value derived somehow from the message email ID. I am in favor of nil because it gives information. The argument in favor of having it be the same as the message ID, and then it's the same thing. Gmail responded they used the same ID for both. We used to use an ID that was obviously derived. It was the first N characters of the message ID, and we changed it in our server deliberately so that they didn't look the same, so that some client author looking at a message ID and a thread ID didn't say, I can derive one of these from the other with some string manipulation. We didn't want that. So we now XOR it against a number that I picked out of somewhere or other and hard-coded in the source, because it doesn't matter, but it just means it doesn't look the same. All right, so there's some work to do there, and probably a little bit more discussion of what to do with thread ID on the list, because we clearly didn't have consensus amongst the people who've been discussing that so far. So I will take that bit back to the list as well.
But you can ask whether people are happy to take it as a working group document.
Yes.
Because I think we're so passionately discussing it because we probably care.
Yeah. All right. Any objections to taking it as a working group document? Jabba, anyone? Give them a moment.
Alexi, just as a participant, we've been talking about this for years, so I think that's a good
Yes,
piece
same,
of
no
work.
objection from Jeff. And the discussion on the mailing list in the last few days has been people keen for it. So there hasn't been anyone saying, no, why are you doing this? Excellent. Hey, Alexi. I have your slides. I will pull them up now. After I kill off the multiple copies of crashed LibreOffice that are still running here.
So, yes, just as a side note, it's very useful to do slides when you already presented on this a few years back. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago when I actually presented. This one was in APSA working group back then.
Oh, it's full screen in this full screen mode. And it's come back over here. Thanks.
Right.
All right. Maybe I'll just do it in mostly full
That's
screen
fine.
mode. There you go. Sorry. Linux, how does it even work?
Right.
I'll get my mouse pointer over here, and there we go.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through the history of this. I think I've been working on the document for years now, and 3 or 4 years, and it has been 15 years since IMAP for Rev 1. Next slide, please.
All right, there's a question from Jabba, from Stefan, saying, I read IMAP for Rev 2 long ago, wonder what, if anything, has changed. So just for your interest during this.
Depends which version you've read, but I think I'm trying to summarize all changes so far in these slides. So for the most part, this is presentation of how I view this. Obviously, if we take it into the working group, different people have different opinions, so we can tweak things, but this is where I'm coming from with this document. So 3 main goals. One is we have lots of useful extensions that have been deployed since IMAP4F1. They make clients' job much easier. They're relatively widespread, so let's add them to the document. At the same time, this is not a major rewrite of IMAP4F1. Most servers already implement these extensions. These are just minor tweaks, and there should be a section just saying, what you need to do, update on the server to be compliant. And the other thing is you should be able to implement both IMAP4F1 and Ref2 on the same port, because you use enable for IMAP4F2 that serves as a switch for the server.
Excuse me, this is Barry. Should we put, I haven't read this recently, so should we roll the list extensions and quota into here? Okay.
Let's defer this until late in the slide. I have a slide on this.
All right.
So next slide. There are three set of changes that I was planning for this document. Roughly speaking, additions, as in adding common extensions just to the base, clarifications and fixes, updating references, and then at the end, probably the most difficult bit is taking a few things away that we think is really obsolete. So the first set of changes is I've folded all the errata. I updated TLS recommendations. Chris published one document on recommendations for MUA, and that affect this document. I had a separate RFC about TLS server identity verification, so both of these are now referenced. Then I added response codes and pieces of IMAP IBNF, which I think were relevant to this. Next slide. Now, this slide is talking about various extensions that I already added. I can talk about each point, or people can just read. For the most part, is making protocol more symmetrical, like adding unselect, adding UID plus, because we, in the IMAP4F1 we have some commands which are only using message numbers. Some use both UIDs or message numbers, and there were UID plus extensions that made it more complete.
There'll be some discussion here, like whether we should be doing literal minus rather than literal plus.
Fine.
Given that was standardized, and
okay.
it gives you a nice balanced usage.
Fine. Then also add very common things like special use, which is very popular, namespace, bits of list extended. It's not fully integrated. I think there is some work to do. Basic syntax and basic extensibility is there because we have so many extensions that rely on this. Use enable because you want to coexist with IMAP4F1. E-search instead of search, really better syntax, more compact, blah, 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 blah. Few other things, SSLR, literal plus. I'm happy to discuss literal minus idle. Look at Appendix B. It should list more. I'm sorry, it sort of has two lists. One list is the changes I've already done, and the other list is changes planned with some extensions marked as being done, but I'll make it clearer in the next revision. Next slide. So, future directions, I would like to take this, clarify a few things like body structure and how it's generated for different MIME messages. I think the IMAP4F1 had an extended example to which I have to refer to every time I have a problem with the client or the server on this. But I think we can have more examples to actually show special cases, in particular, forwarded message with message RFC 822, because it's really a special case every time. Then there are a few keywords that I think are in common use that I would like to add, and maybe phishing is another one, and junk, but we can discuss, sort of.
Neil Jenkins, is there a reason they need to be there when they're all in the registry now, and we'll just say refer to the registry?
Yes, the reason is that, well, at least as far as I know, there are servers that don't implement extensibility. They don't implement arbitrary keywords. Or there are servers that have limits. The one that have limits are less problematic, but the one that don't implement, for example, Microsoft Exchange, for them, I think listing the one that we really care about is important. So if they can upgrade easily, then they can add it.
Yeah, and this is Barry. I think in general, listing the ones we think are important is useful anyway. I mean, saying, really, these are no longer extensions. These are things we consider part of the base IMAP.
For those of you who came in late, by the way, we're officially 5 minutes over our end time, but we have a half-hour break before the next session, so we decided we're quite happy to keep running on. I assume no one has a problem with that.
Right. And then I think the one thing which is I haven't done is we do lots of extensions to status and also status with lists. So I think probably adding this to the spec would be also a good idea. Next slide. Right. I know it's potentially a rat hole or something that we might talk a lot about. This is things that I think we should take out. If chairs want to discuss them now or not. The obvious things are, UTF-7 encoding for mailbox. I think the world has moved to UTF-8 to a large extent. I think we should accept UTF-8. The IMAP4F1 implies that you can use them, but doesn't provide enough details. I suggest we change the syntax. Servers can still re-encode them to UTF-7 internally if they want to support IMAP4F1, but
so on the UTF-7 mailbox names, the way I'd lean is allow clients to express mailbox names in UTF-8 in the protocol. Yes. But the server must downgrade them to UTF-7 for backwards compatibility. We're trying to run both ports. Now, if a client does enable UTF-8, they go away. They go away but I know that's clunky, but you're not going to break any software if you do that.
Well, because this already requires enable IMAP4F2, I think that's sort of similar to enable UTF-8, and you just have UTF-8 clean mailbox names. Okay, and the server can store them in modified UTF-7 on the, all right.
There's still some issues with encoding of separator. If you have a mailbox name that has the separator encoded in it as modified UTF-7, you still can't express that as UTF-8 cleanly.
A good point. Add this to the note. I'll have a look here.
I would love for mailbox names to be a list of individual names rather than have a separator, but that's a sailed ship.
And then I'm not trying to get into this rat hole, but there is only one true separator really that every server should implement, but never mind that.
I agree.
Then the other thing is take out the recent flag, which I think most of the people find it to be useless, and it's just such a pain to implement. It requires extra lock on the mailbox if there are multiple clients accessing the same mailbox. Full disclosure, the server I'm working on we just ignore this this requirement in IMAP4F1. Nobody complained. And the other thing is there is unseen response code and mailbox open, first unseen or something, whatever it is called. I think most clients don't care, and clients that care can issue search command for this. So,
yeah, certainly if you have eSearch, you can ask for the first match.
Exactly.
And you get the same value.
You do min eSearch, yeah. Okay. No, that's too much.
There's a list coming at the microphone here.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, request from Jabba. Backwards compatibility deserves a nod. Not fully aware of all the implementation headaches declare a winner. Definitely think that binary body encoding should be included in IMAP 4 Rev 2. Want to take the opportunity to have the ABNF checked and if necessary corrected. Has the ABNF in this draft been given much formal analysis yet?
Who was the question from?
That's Sean Leonard.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure what formal analysis is in this case. Most of the things I've done is existing ABNF plus pieces of IMAP ABNF RFC 4466. It's entirely possible I've made a mistake, but this will go through a tool, so we'll have to make sure that it's right before we.
And I didn't understand that. I mean, you appeared to run a couple of things together. I didn't understand the bit about compatibility, what he's looking for there.
Definitely think binary body encoding should be included in the...
Before that, there was stuff about compatibility.
Okay, I agree with making it clean. Backwards compatibility also deserves a nod. Not fully aware of all the implementation headaches to declare a winner, though. That's what the text says.
A question to Sean is Alexei's original comment that you can run this in parallel with IMAP 4 Rev 1. Is that sufficient to deal with the compatibility for the moment? Sean
is here.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, those were actually two separate comments to two separate parts. My point about compatibility, or my point about making it clean and backwards compatibility specifically was addressing the UTF-7 versus UTF-8 discussion, because other people in the Jabber list were chiming in about making it clean. So I just wanted to clarify that's a separate thing from my other comments.
Okay, yes, I recognize that it was. That's why I was trying to figure out where the dividing line was, because Ron just read the whole thing as one SKU.
Yeah, I hadn't been aware of the earlier one at the time. So
okay, thanks, Sean.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, the binary body encoding and the stuff I said after about ABNF are totally separate points I wanted to raise.
And I agree with the binary.
So binary is actually one of the following slides. So yeah, but come back. Well, so regarding backward compatibility, there is actually a short sentence with a short section, which just a stop sentence there saying it's okay, but I think we probably need a bit more text. And the purpose of it, we need to help out implementers to maybe have a list of all the things they need to change if they want to start from IMAP 4 F1 to bring it up to date with this. So, right, next slide. So, okay, I think binary, I would personally like to add it to the protocol, and we can ask on the mailing list. And I would also like to get rid of LSUB because we have list extended, which absorb the whole thing. It makes it's a bit easier, but again.
+1 to that. Matt, you talking about LSUB? Okay. I would add two things. The EAI UTF-8 stuff should be part of the base. And Quota as an optional feature. I think it's better to have it in the base rather than as an extension, but specify it as not required to be supported. It needs to be.
With the editor hat on, my preference is to have a section on other recommended extensions and don't pull Quota in because this is going to be a red hole. I know, right, okay. And this can either reference to old RFC we already published or whatever gets to replace it. Right.
Yeah, I'm good if you say if these are also recommended. That's good.
Okay, a couple issues I want to raise. The first one is, I'll note our server implements list status and will implement list rights and will not implement list extended. The reason we won't implement list extended is because it allows multiple mailbox wildcards. If you restrict this to single mailbox, we'll do list extended.
I was young and ambitious at the time. I think I can live with this. I think it's, yeah, I tell you a secret, in our server, we didn't implement it either. So,
Oh man, do you know how long I spent making that work?
you can still do list extended with IMAP for F2. It will work just fine. Okay. Well, I think these days you can just pipeline multiple requests if you really want, list in box and list all sub-3 of this and everything in this namespace. So it's actually not, yeah.
I only have to ship.
So yeah, I think that should be very reasonable change. Yeah.
Okay, the second thing I want to consider is either mailbox names are NFC normalized, or the server can change a mailbox name when you create it.
This is Barry. I think the former. What change it? How? What would you mean?
I would change it to, if it's not NFC, I'd change it to NFC on creation. I can't do that in the IMAP base spec because of the modified UTF-7 ward.
Right. No, absolutely. The server needs to enforce the NFC. Absolutely. Sean.
Hi. I don't have a lot of experience with changing mailbox names for normalization purposes, but I would say that one way to analyze it is to look at how file systems do it and the advantages and pitfalls of the consequences of when they do that. Because some file systems don't change it at all and they survive. Others, like I think Apple's HFS, normalized to NFD, and that has different consequences. So just wanted to make that up.
So I'll tell you the reason I'm asking for this is Apple's file system leaks this crap all over the place, including into email and mailbox names and everything. And then when you take that and try to feed it into like an index search system, you got to normalize it, and it just creates this disaster. So
isn't it great that we have unique IDs on mailboxes now? And if we defined a return of the unique ID at the time you created the mailbox, you could use that to discover if anything weird had happened to it.
Ooh, that would be adequate for the problem.
Maybe, but the problem is if you're using systems where you might type in a mailbox name, then you have issues with the normalization. So, and the reason, Sean, from NFC rather than NFD is simply that we've been using NFC pretty consistently in other protocols. So.
Yeah, to be clear, I think if you have to standardize on a normalization form, NFC would be more appropriate because of the IETF way. I'm fairly certain once you have something in one normalization form, such as NFD, it should go or transmute to NFC okay. It just means it gets recomposed. Yeah. Although there's a lot of Unicode there are edge cases stuff that you have to deal with. I mean, I hope nobody's using NFKC for anything, but yeah. Okay, I'll stop now.
However, you have created an action item for me for the unique ID draft to have both append and create, potentially return the ID straight away.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Okay.
Okay, so Alexei, as a participant, I don't object to the normalization or some text about this, but we need to think about the text, how you return the new name to the server. I would also like to possibly fold unique ID into the spec. I would like to fold stuff into the document which is already specified, so hopefully it will be RFC, before we actually do this. So
I'll be pushing that one pretty hard.
Yeah, basically, the point is try to avoid too much experimentation with stuff.
Yeah.
We don't want to put something there which doesn't work. I want to do minimal changes to the...
If there's a safe way to return it as part of the create response, then that shouldn't be too, I hope, difficult, especially now that there's no encoding issues.
Okay, I'm supportive of adding binary. The proposal to fold in all of the UTF-8 stuff from EAI, I'm not sure. The mailbox name stuff from the EAI spec, absolutely.
Username possibly is straightforward as well.
Actually, the new EAI spec dropped all the username stuff. So you have to use plain if you're using a non-ASCII username. You have to use authenticate plain. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, you could deprecate login.
Hey.
That would be nice.
No, you can't actually. But it's nice to think about.
You can't, can you enable before login? I guess if you can enable this before login, then you could deprecate things. If you're not enabling things before authentication, I can say from our proxy architecture, that would be a freaking nightmare because you don't even know which backend you're on before you've authenticated. You might wind up unenabled again once you'd logged in.
I think there might be one or two more slides. Just scroll down. Right, okay, I want to get to this point and the rest we can take to the mailing list about a specific proposal, what to add on.
So for Chris, go back to the previous thing. What I want the IMAP base, if we're going to rev the IMAP base, I want the IMAP base to support the EAI stuff. If you have an EAI message, you know, the EAI downgrading and all that crap that it does.
Yeah, I think we need to think about, I'm supportive of trying to figure out how to make it at least ready for it. But yeah,
we'll talk about it further. On bullet 2 on this slide, I'll help you. And clearly that means that I agree with the first one. Although, as I said earlier, I think we should not, we can adopt it. I don't think we should crank it up until we get some more of the documents off the queue. Well, that means you and I can still work on it in the meantime.
right. My preference is to adopt it and we just take our time and then, I mean, by not deliberately trying to be too slow, but just, you know, there is no pressure and then we'll figure out it as we go.
All right.
Okay.
I'm happy to call for objections to adoption at this point. Anybody?
God, no.
Fantastic. All right, we'll adopt the work and yeah.
You already have my document in your queue.
Yeah.
I forgot to put the replaces information, so.
Oh, I can.
Cool. All right. The agenda at this point said any other business. There's nothing else, so I'm not going to bother changing back to the slides. Chris?
So I had published a draft a while ago that is expired, which was the unauthenticate extension. And at the time I brought it up, there was no working group and not enough interest expressed in implementing it to get it adopted by AD. I would like this draft done because it's an interop. I mean, I've implemented a private extension, but it's an interoperability thing. So the purpose of this is when you have some sort of appliance or application that's talking to an IMAP backend on behalf of multiple users, it allows that appliance to have a connection pool and leave the connections open and switch users within the session so that you don't have to renegotiate SSL or anything like that. So that's the motivation. Specific use cases of it are like a voicemail front end for IMAP that would feed voicemails in, or JMAP proxy to an IMAP server would also, might also be interested in a connection pool.
It feels like it fits in one of these earlier slides with make the protocol more symmetrical.
Now I do not want it. I don't think it belongs in IMAP 4 Rev 2. and the draft actually advises you leave it off by default.
Yeah,
Okay,
I haven't read the draft. I assume it clears all enable flags and everything else that's been done as part of the unauthenticate.
Yes.
Yes. This is Barry. With that addition, I'm happy with it. The server I wrote has severe isolation stuff in there, and I would not implement it. But great.
I have actually implemented it, so.
All right.
Although it was experimental branch, so I was never turned it on, but
So
I have implemented it.
That sounds to me like a call for adoption. Are there any objections to us adopting this piece of work? Excellent. We'll adopt your expired draft and start work on it.
Well, not till I republish it.
Well, yes. Hang on.
Yes, please.
Incoming.
Hi, this is Sean Leonard. I'm in favor of adoption of this draft. That being said, yeah, isn't there like a procedure? You're supposed to take it to the list and give it 3 weeks or something like that, or not?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially since it wasn't announced.
Here, you need to double check.
Yes.
All right. He's our AD at the moment, but my view on this sort of thing is that the working group is agreeing to take a starting point. It's not a big thing, and if the working group later says, no, we've thought about this a bit, we've talked about it, it's full of shit, get rid of it, we can get rid of it. I really don't think we need to go through a formality of making it wait 2 weeks. But we will defer to our AD.
I think my point is you need to ask the questions. Are there any objections on the mailing list?
Yep.
I'm very happy for chairs to optimize it, adopt it, and if there is a storm of objections on the mailing list, then it can be unadopted. I think that's okay.
Cool. I will run a call for adoption later today, and if there are no objections, we start next week. Yay. For all of the 4 things that we've decided to adopt today, making us stack now 10 documents we're working on. At this point, unless there's anything really urgent, I'd like to give up this chair and allow the next session to set up, because we have run nearly half an hour over our allocated time. Thank you, everybody.
Anybody not do the blue sheets yet?
Right, thanks. Cool.
Thank you for this.